Hey everyone, Rick Howard here. Season 4 of my podcast, CSO Perspectives, starts next week. We will be talking about all things cloud through a first principle lens. We'll start with the specific SolarWinds attacks and then move more generally into how to protect the big three cloud provider networks, the Google Cloud Platform, or GCP, Microsoft Azure, and Amazon Web Services, or AWS. And I will be joined by our hash table subject matter experts, other CSOs, and industry thought leaders who come on the show to challenge my crazy ideas and to share their unique experiences and perspectives. If this sounds like something you'd be interested in, tune in Monday for the very first episode of the series. Check it out at thecyberwire.com/pro. That's thecyberwire.com/pro.
CISA updates its guidance on Solorigate and issues an alert that the threat actor may have used attack vectors other than the much-discussed SolarWinds backdoor. Some reports suggest that a widely used development tool produced by a Czech firm may have been compromised. The cyberespionage campaign is now known to have extended to the Department of Justice and the U.S. federal courts. Robert M. Lee shares lessons learned from a recent power grid incident in Mumbai. Our guest is Yassir Abousselham from Splunk on how attackers find new ways to exploit emerging technologies and the cyber implications of the Capitol Hill riot. From the CyberWire studios at Data Tribe, I'm Dave Bittner with your CyberWire summary for Thursday, January 7th, 2021. CISA said late yesterday that it had determined that the threat actor behind the Solorigate incident used additional SAML attack vectors beyond the now well-known SolarWinds supply chain approach. Alert AA20-352A reported that, quote, CISA has evidence that there are initial access vectors other than the SolarWinds Orion platform, and has identified legitimate account abuse as one of these vectors. Specifically, we are investigating incidents in which activity indicating abuse of security assertion markup language, that's SAML, tokens consistent with this adversary's behavior is present, yet where impacted SolarWinds instances have not been identified. End quote. We read the ambiguous phrase legitimate account abuse as meaning abuse of legitimate accounts. It's the compromised accounts that are legitimate, not the abuse, which of course is never legitimate. Yesterday's alert also addresses the finding security firm Velocity reported last month. Quote, Velocity has also reported publicly that they observed the APT using a secret key that the APT previously stole in order to generate a cookie to bypass the Duo multi-factor authentication, protecting access to Outlook web app. Velocity attributes this intrusion to the same activity as the SolarWinds Orion supply chain compromise, and the TTPs are consistent between the two. This observation indicates that there are other initial access vectors beyond SolarWinds Orion, and there may still be others that are not yet known. End quote. So the campaign has long been regarded as complicated and sophisticated, but the care and complexity of the threat actor's approach continue to come to light. CISA has also updated Emergency Directive 21-01 to reflect what's now known about the campaign and offering new guidance on effective remediation. That guidance includes both forensic analysis and reporting requirements. First, if there's no evidence of follow-on activity by the threat actor, it's time to rebuild. As the directive puts it, quote, federal agencies without evidence of adversary follow-on activity on their networks that accept the risk of running SolarWinds Orion in their enterprises should rebuild or upgrade, in compliance with hardening steps outlined in the supplemental guidance, to at least SolarWinds Orion Platform version 2020.2.1 HF2. End quote. NSA has examined this version and determined that, quote, it eliminates the previously identified malicious code, end quote. And the upgraded version also includes other fixes important to security going forward. Second, if an organization has evidence that the threat actor has been back or has never left, they are to check in with CISA. Quote, Federal agencies with evidence of follow-on threat actor activity on their networks should keep their affected versions disconnected, conduct forensic analysis, and consult with CISA before rebuilding or reimaging affected platforms and host operating systems." End quote. It's an ongoing threat, of course, but it's also an opportunity to learn more about the adversary. CISA didn't say so in yesterday's statements, but the New York Times reports that both government investigators and private security firms are now looking into the possibility that JetBrains, a Czech firm with researchers in Russia, may have been an approach for the Solorigate attackers. JetBrains would appear to be the Eastern European software company mentioned in reports earlier this week as possibly implicated in further supply chain compromises. The company makes tools for developers, and those are used by developers in several large companies, including SolarWinds. The tool of interest is JetBrains' Team City, which developers use to test and exchange software code before releasing it. Team City is widely used. JetBrains counts among its customers not only SolarWinds, but also Google, Hewlett-Packard, Citibank, Siemens, VMware, and a great many Android developers. JetBrains said in its blog that it hasn't been contacted by investigators. It also says that it wasn't involved in any attack and that its customers, including SolarWinds, hadn't complained of security issues. The company does note that Team City is a complex product that requires proper certification for secure and effective use. The AP reports that the U.S. Department of Justice has confirmed that some of its systems, although none that handle classified information, were compromised in Solorigate. The compromise also extended to U.S. federal courts. The Administrative Office of the U.S. Court says an apparent compromise of the U.S. judiciary's case management and electronic case file system is under investigation. Rioters protesting the results of the 2020 U.S. presidential election rampaged through the U.S. Capitol yesterday evening to protest the certification of the electoral votes that, now certified, have confirmed the victory of President-elect Biden. Three aspects of the riot are of significance to cybersecurity. First, there's the use of social media to incite the rioting. In this respect, President Trump has come in for considerable criticism, as he has for weeks not only contested the fairness and legitimacy of the election, as he's entitled to do within reason, but also more recently encouraged demonstrators to come to Washington and express their displeasure with the outcome. His last tweet yesterday urged demonstrators to be peaceful, but that unfortunately seemed to have had little effect. The Wall Street Journal reports that Twitter has suspended the president for the next few days, and that Facebook has kicked him off its platforms, at least until he leaves office. Second, there was apparently some use of social media to organize the riot, including messages directing protesters down streets where they'd be less likely to be interdicted by police. And finally, the physical ransacking of a place where there were computers presents the possibility of physical destruction, theft, or compromise. Some staffers evacuated their offices in such haste that machines were left on, with emails and other material up on their screens. And at least one senator reported the theft of a computer. Reuters reports that Senator Jeff Merkley, Democrat of Oregon, said that rioters took a laptop from a desk in his office. Lest it be forgotten that riots are kinetic acts in the physical world, remember this. In addition to the physical destruction at the Capitol itself, one of the rioters was shot dead by police. And now, a word from our sponsor, ExtraHop, securing modern business with cloud-native network detection and response. The massive shift to remote work has turned the reality of work on its head. With cloud and multi-cloud adoption, comprehensive visibility is more important than ever. But in order to protect your business, you need more than unified visibility. You need intelligence response workflows so teams can collaborate easily and act quickly. ExtraHop helps organizations like Wizards of the Coast detect threats up to 95% faster. As John Kreese, senior IT engineer, puts it, quote, ExtraHop is helping us accelerate cloud adoption by ensuring our workloads are secure. See how it works in the full product demo, free and no forms required, at extrahop.com/cyber. That's extrahop.com/cyber. And we thank Extra Hop for sponsoring our show. My guest today is Yassir Abousselham. He's Chief Information Security Officer at Splunk. And he joins us today with some thoughts on what has his attention as 2021 is upon us. Yassir, welcome to the show.
Thank you, David. Good to be here.
So 2021, first of all, I guess there's a lot of us who can probably agree that we're looking forward to having 2020 in our rearview mirror for many, many reasons. But as we are heading into 2021 here, what sort of things have your attention? What's caught your eye? What do you think we need to be focused on?
Yeah, there's a few things actually. So if we think about this year, 2020, and extrapolates into 2021, I think one thing that definitely catches my attention is the fact that remote work is here to stay. That is one safe prediction that we can make. The second thing that is somewhat related is the fact that attackers will continue capitalizing on the latest social and political issues. Another thing that, in terms of predictions, that I think we will see continue to rise is the attacks on the supply chain. And then lastly, digital transformation. I think what we have seen and which will continue most likely into 2021 is this acceleration of digital transformation as a way for organizations to provide their employees and customers with the services that they need to be effective.
So in terms of what we might expect from the attackers themselves, what sort of things are on your radar there?
Yeah, I think the attackers will continue pursuing the shortest path to compromise. And typically, that consists of using the what I call the standard techniques to achieve that compromise. And by standard techniques, I mean things like social engineering, i.e. phishing, fraud, and so on. You have ransomware going after misconfigured or vulnerable infrastructure, application layer attacks, and things like password spraying and credential stuffing. So those are what I would call the standard attacks. And that's what's being used on a day-to-day basis. Typically, you put any kind of device or system on the internet, and it will get scanned within minutes. And then you have the more advanced attacks, and that's what's being used by the well-funded, in some cases, nation-state actors. And they typically focus on or target supply chain. They're able to acquire, weaponize, and use 0 days. You see a rampant also use of either physical attacks, extortion techniques, and so on. That is not something that we see on a day-to-day basis, but just some of these techniques that we should be aware of.
All right. Yassir Abousselham, Chief Information Security Officer at Splunk. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Dave.
And now a message from our sponsor, Linode. Whether you're working on a personal project or managing enterprise infrastructure, you deserve simple, affordable, and accessible cloud computing solutions that allow you to take your project to the next level. Simplify your cloud infrastructure with Linode's Linux virtual machines and develop, deploy, and scale your modern applications faster and easier. Get started on Linode today with $100 in free credit for listeners of the CyberWire Daily Podcast. You can find all the details at linode.com/cyberwire. Linode has 11 global data centers and provides 24/7, 365 human support with no tiers or handoffs regardless of your plan size. In addition to shared and dedicated compute instances, you can use your $100 credit on S3-compatible object storage, managed Kubernetes, and more. Visit linode.com/cyberwire and click on the Create Free Account button to get started. And we thank Linode for sponsoring our show. And joining me once again is Robert M. Lee. He's the CEO at Dragos. Rob, it's always great to have you back. We recently had this story about a sizable power outage in Mumbai. And I wanted to get your take on this because, as is always the case when these sorts of things happen, there's a certain group of people who want to point the finger at cyber. I wanted to get your take. Where do you think we stand here?
Sure. So I'll say so far that the folks that have seemed to have pointed the finger towards cyber have actually been those involved in the government, the state government in that region in India. So it always raises the level of discussion when you have alleged, government-involved personnel. Now, that being said, we have also seen before where government personnel have come out and claimed cyber attacks as relation to outages, and they were either wrong or they were purposely misleading. So a good example of folks that have been wrong before, and not to, in any way make them feel bad, but just for the purpose of education here, we've seen a good example is one of the Israeli energy ministers came out at a conference they had and said, right now we have the worst cyber attack in history taking place, and it is taking place on the Israeli power grid. What he actually meant to say was there was a phishing email to a PC in a regulatory office, completely disconnected from the electric grid, that somebody opened the email and it had ransomware on it. Those two things are very different. So it's, capturing the nuance of things like electric power outages and cyber attacks can be difficult for folks. We've also had the malicious before, or I would say at least the intentionally misleading, where we had government officials in Venezuela come out and blame the United States for cyber attacks, taking down portions of their electric infrastructure, when it was actually their mismanagement and under-resourcing of maintenance as related to some of their dam infrastructure. So government being involved is interesting, but not necessarily convincing. So at the highest level, what I will say is the individuals supposedly involved have said there's going to be a government report coming out. That's when people should look at it and take it for consideration and start digging into the details. Prior to that report, there's nothing to dig into. Anything at this point would just be speculation. There's folks that could very reasonably try to argue that there's been conflict between China and India in the region. We do expect to see cyber attacks on infrastructure in geopolitical tense times. Saw that between Russia and Ukraine, Russia and Georgia, Russia and others. We've seen it before around the world. You also do accept, though, that India has had a number of maintenance issues on portions of their infrastructure before, and outages are pretty common. Also, there's reason to take credit or sort of, play the victim card, if you will, related to cyber attacks, as we saw in Venezuela, versus admitting infrastructure problems. So basically what I'm saying is everybody needs to dial it down. There's nothing here that raises suspicion that there was a cyber attack. There's nothing here that disperses the idea that there could have been. So there's not a whole lot of details to this. Everyone just needs to wait. But until further information, I would put this in the camp of not very likely, but something to watch.
Now, a point that I've seen you make is that when these sorts of things happen, people go looking through their systems. They go looking and almost looking for trouble. And so it's not unusual to find some malware in a system somewhere, but that doesn't necessarily mean that bit of found malware was the thing responsible for this outage.
Absolutely. I guarantee if they go looking in their systems, they will absolutely find malicious software somewhere, or scans from Chinese IP addresses or something along those lines. And the reality is, it's exactly the point you just made. Incident responders, when they get involved, are usually taking a much deeper look than day-to-day security efforts. And that's obvious because day-to-day security efforts, you have so much going on that you can't look deeply at everything. There's not enough time in the day. And when you get sort of called in and told, here is a network segment, here are some key systems, look for everything, you are going to find things that get missed. And we've seen this before, time and time again. We've dealt with it in my firm in incident response cases where folks will start to see artifacts of previous pen tests, previous adversaries, random malware, et cetera, and start trying to correlate these to events they've had. Oh, well, I remember there was something weird going on in the relay, or there was an outage here that we couldn't really explain. And I will challenge the community by saying, we don't do good enough forensics and ICS or industrial control systems to really prove those things very often. That's a gap we have. But also, we can't go the other direction and then correlate things together just because they exist in the network. And too often we see the opposite, which is what I think might be happening here, because the government personnel explicitly mentioned that they did find malware on some of those systems. And the pure presence of malware means absolutely nothing.
Yeah. All right. Interesting perspective for sure. Robert M. Lee, thanks for joining us. Thanks to all of our sponsors for making the CyberWire possible. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. And for professionals and cybersecurity leaders who want to stay abreast of this rapidly evolving field, sign up for CyberWire Pro. It'll save you time and keep you informed. The art of engineering. Listen for us on your Alexa smart speaker, too. The CyberWire podcast is proudly produced in Maryland out of the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technologies. Our amazing CyberWire team is Elliot Peltzman, Puru Prakash, Kelsey Bond, Tim Nodar, Joe Kerrigan, Carol Terrio, Ben Yellen, Nick Valecki, Gina Johnson, Bennett Moe, Chris Russell, John Petrick, Jennifer Iben, Rick Howard, Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here tomorrow. In the turbulent security space that's filled with overhyped solutions and empty promises, Red Canary breaks through with radical transparency and a laser focus on delivering outcomes. They are relentless in their vision to create a world where every organization can achieve its mission without fear of cyber attacks. Great security operations depend on detection and response capabilities that reduce the time attackers can spend in your network. That means having detailed visibility and broad detection in the places where they operate, your endpoints, your network, and your cloud environments. Red Canary is passionate about improving outcomes, not just for their customers, but for the entire community. You see that passion in the content they deliver and via their open source projects like Atomic Red Team. At the end of the day, Red Canary is your security ally. See what it's like to have a partner in the fight. Visit redcanary.com today. And we thank Red Canary for sponsoring our show.